I do want to thank you all for making time for this extra meeting. I realize that it, creates challenges for all of you who assumed that we were done. And it just felt to me that when we wrapped up on Wednesday that we were leaving this kind of critical situation in a state of uncertainty. And I felt we needed to sort of circle back around to see if we could dial it in and create some clarity and certainty around this, both for the county and for St. Vincent de Paul, as well as, of course, for the people who are living out on Highway 99. So I very much appreciate you taking the time. And, keeping in mind that this is a winter emergency that we're trying to address, and that in the intervening days since Wednesday, as you know, the staff has worked very closely with the county, with St. Vinny's, with the advocates to craft a plan to address as many of your concerns as possible. So we will take the time that we need today to kind of circle back and understand what it is that they are proposing. I know it's not usual to have a special meeting and not usual for me to preside from a distance. And at the time that I worked with staff and said I would call this meeting, I didn't know who would be available to attend. So just stepped right up and said I would call the meeting and preside over the meeting, not knowing how that would work. So the way I'm proposing to do this is that instead of trying to keep a queue, we'll just go around the table. We'll begin with the council president, with Mike, go on to Betty, and then work our way clockwise around the table. We'll just keep going until everybody's had a chance to sort of ask the questions and get the answers they need. So if you want to pass on the first round, we'll pick you up on the second round. If in the course of events that seems to be too cumbersome, then I will turn to you, Mike, and ask you if you would keep the queue. But we'll try just moving through and see how that goes. And then because I can't see the clock, I'm going to count on you to sort of pay attention to the timing and pay attention for yourself and then for others so that we don't run over too much. And with all of that said, thank you again for being here. And I will turn this over to Christy that's lead us off.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that, Council. Appreciate you having us here tonight and having this special meeting to go over this proposal that we have. So tonight we're here to present a proposal for day and night homeless services on Highway 99. The proposal is in response to Council's request for an option of a more hybrid or a program that provides greater flexibility and accessibility than the current Dusk to Dawn program model that we use on Highway 99. The timing of this proposal aligns with the end of the 30 to 60 day temporary site established by Lane County and Highway at 525 Highway 99. In front of you, you have a map, and we thought it might be helpful because we've been floating a lot of addresses around to kind of explain what we're talking about. On the map in front of you, you have 3 different sites designated. The first one has a little bit of a purple flag near the top of the page. That is 717 Highway 99, and it is the site of the current Dusk to Dawn program. That program provides services right now to over 100 people and the traditional format that everybody is used to. The blue flag at the bottom of the page is the Lindholm Center. The Lindholm Center provides services, day services to, and a lot of different, a wide array, including meals, laundry, other support help at that site. And that site address is 450 Highway 99. The yellow flag notes the 525 site where the temporary homeless camp is today that we've been talking quite a bit about. So our proposal is that is really to continue to move forward in addressing the current state of the camp at 525 Highway 99 was always intended to be a short-term 30 to 60 day solution to address an emergency need. The camp has approximately 100 campers. Camp conditions have been declining and the need for medical and public safety services is increasing. The public health and safety of the campers and the surrounding areas is of growing concern. The lack of site management for the large number of individuals at the site cannot continue in this matter. It's a concern for the well-being of all of those that are at the camp as well as the people that are in and around the camp. I have had recent conversations with advocates and also heard from folks within the camp through other sources that people are really concerned about the viability of the camp in its current state. So our proposal is to continue to move forward as we look to a better plan for helping support this group. So the proposal before you tonight is to expand the 717 Highway 99 Dusk to Dawn site by 80 participants and provide for daytime access to the site. In addition, provide the flexibility for St. Vincent de Paul to provide a micro version of the Dusk to Dawn program, and that would be provide for campers to use their own tents, maintain their personal belongings, and also provide day access to the site. And lastly, we're asking for funding for these programs or requesting for use of funding. You might remember the original $300,000. That was part of Supplemental 1. Last week, you took action to provide us dollars to continue the Lindholm support for the campers and the needs of the community. And what we're asking for is additional resources to support the Dusk to Dawn and the micro and provide for that daytime access that we believe provides the flexibility that Council was requesting last week. This is effectively what we would refer to as more of a dawn-to-dawn model in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, in that people that are at the site have the ability to be at the site during the day. They have the ability to come and go. They have the ability to access the Lindholm Center services and also have a place to sleep at night. And with that, I also wanted to, one of the questions that you asked last week was what the status of the Lane County, what was Lane County planning to do at 525. And I have a statement prepared by the county that I'd like to read to you. Lane County continues to invest in long-term solutions to end the cycle of homelessness in our community. The county values its partnership with the City of Eugene and are pleased that the City Council is considering solutions to help address the immediate needs of our unhoused population. Lane County envisions long-term potential for the property currently known as Camp 99 to serve as a part of the solution to homelessness in our community, and is actively working with city officials and community partners to evaluate the feasibility of its use for the long term. While the county continues to evaluate the possibilities related to the Camp 99 site, it must also acknowledge and respond to the health and safety of individuals at the site, as well as the neighbors and businesses in the area and the broader community. The county opened Camp 99 as a temporary solution to a crisis situation in downtown Eugene and readily acknowledged that the current model would not be sustainable for longer than 60 days. In fact, there are significant challenges with the current model from a health and safety perspective, and the camp is not in compliance with city code. The county's current plan is to work with its partners to transition individuals at the camp to the new locations under the discussion by the City Council, as well as other services available in the community. Today, County Human Services staff and community service providers met with campers at the site to provide additional opportunities to connect to needed services. Over 25 individuals at the camp have already transitioned to the existing Dusk to Dawn services. Once the current site is cleared, the site will be remediated and the county will work with community-based service providers to determine potential temporary uses for the property, utilizing a structured and accountable model that provides safe and healthy options for sleep. I'd also like to share that we have some individuals here from St. Vincent de Paul, as well as Lane County, and also if there are questions around some of the public service needs or public safety needs, we have some representatives from police and fire here to answer those questions with as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mayor, to work the queue.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Mike, why don't you kick it off if you're ready?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your report, Christy, on conditions at the camp. I thought it read a little bit like Lord of the Flies there for a bit, which I thought unfortunate, frankly. It's my understanding that what we were doing there at the moment was to be managed better than that reality read. For me, it's not polite for us to speak towards one another in these meetings, and I recognize that. But I would love it if my friend Alan wants to help me understand this better. I remember the first time that you presented the idea of dusk to dawn and rest stops as not permanent camps. And I remembered the arguments that George Poling and I had about how these would become permanent 24-hour camps in time, and that's what would happen. And I remember all of the arguments about that not being the intention and that not being what we want to create. And I wonder what has changed since then that would change your mind about that, since the naming was your idea in the first place. I'm not sure that that creates a much better environment to do it that way, but I have a high degree of faith in St. Vincent de Paul's capacity to manage. So that gives me some degree of comfort. I don't know if they're currently managing what we have at this moment, honestly, from our previous discussions. If so, that's actually less comforting based on what I read about the conditions there. Can you enlighten me on that?
St. Vincent de Paul is not under management responsibility for the site.
I wouldn't have thought so. One of my concerns with the proposals here is that one of the staff members from St. Vincent de Paul has mentioned to me that at least 2 of the campers currently at 99 will be asked to go away because they've been banned for life from St. Vincent de Paul services. I have had several of the campers themselves tell me that that number is much larger, so I don't know how to balance out what I've heard that is different in this particular case. So I'm concerned that when we put this into management, there's also the sphere of those who do not want it to be managed by a company who will protest the idea of not being self-managed and leave and come back downtown just because of the fact that we're giving it to a company and to another firm to manage. So I don't know if this solution really actually solves the problem. It certainly is not my ideal solution for us to continue to spend more and more money not to fix the problem and to create other new ones. I have about 10 seconds left, so instead of going into the next line of argument, I'll wait for round 2 as it comes back around. Thanks.
Mayor, if I might respond.
Okay.
For just a minute.
Yes,
I can
please.
respond with my remaining 6 seconds.
Please go ahead, Christy.
Okay, sorry. I'm not sure that you were asking me specifically a question, but I wanted to respond to the comment that you made about people being 86 from the programs at St. Vincent de Paul. What I learned in talking with St. Vincent de Paul representatives today is that they take a very, very clear approach to trying to be solutions-based. So sometimes some people can get suspended for a day or 2 or a week, but their intent is to really provide service, especially those low barrier, no barrier services to as many people as possible. We do have representatives here. Terry McDonald's here from St. Vincent de Paul. If you want additional information provided about that, we'd be happy to do that.
I'm comfortable with what I heard, and I would also say then that if folks can't meet that very, very low barrier, and there are some, and there are, then we should have another question about a much different kind of approach that's more enforcement-oriented with some of those folks and the problems that are at that camp right now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Betty?
Oh, thank you. Christy, that statement that you read from the county, that didn't come from the county commissioners, did it? As I understand, they haven't met yet.
County administrator.
That was from the administrator, not
Yeah,
from the
thank
county
you for
commission.
clarifying that.
So we don't know whether the county commissioners support that or not, I assume.
I can't say with certainty.
Well,
They are meeting
We couldn't know
tomorrow,
if they haven't met yet. I would have preferred that we wait till after they meet before we discussed anything, since this is their land we're talking about. And then you said add 80 people to 717 Highway 99. Won't that make that a huge place?
It does make it a larger camp for sure. But what we've learned in talking with our partners at St. Vincent de Paul is they have the capacity at the site to be able to accommodate that. And one of the reasons that that model works is that it is very structured and there is a high level of oversight. What we're really doing and really grateful for is their willingness to take on sort of that dawn to dawn approach where we can have access for people throughout the day. And so I would say that the structure and the oversight are the things that will be critical for the success of that camp, and I believe St. Vincent de Paul is in position to do that.
And how far do they have to go from there to get to the Lindholm Center for showers and other things?
Well, I can't tell exactly by looking at this map, but it is something that people regularly do now.
They do?
Yeah.
It looked, and they have a way to cross this. Is that on the other side of the highway also?
It is. It's that purple marker just up from the yellow kind of tab that's on that page.
Oh, that's purple.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the 717 site. And the crosswalk, you might recall that our Public Works Department has added a crosswalk, and that was
here by the Lindholm Center. Yeah.
And that was actually in response well before the 525 Highway 99 site was ever considered because of the people that walked down to access the Lindholm Center to provide them access from the other side.
Is there a sidewalk?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have right now. Thanks.
Okay, great. Claire?
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for calling this special meeting. I'm very glad we are holding it. I was very concerned about what was going to happen to this camp when this council decided not to change it over to a dusk till dawn at our last meeting. I was the sole vote in favor of that, and I was taken aback because I didn't know if the county would be willing to maintain the camp as it was on the site, so I didn't know what was going to happen to the people there. I appreciate that we have representatives from the Eugene Police Department, Lane County Human Services, and St. Vincent de Paul here to answer our questions and help us get information we need to understand these proposals. I'm in support of the motions that staff has brought forward. I really appreciate the work that's gone into thinking about how we tackle this circumstance. I support having the county continue to be a manager of the sites as its appropriate role for the county to take on this work, as they are the Health and Human Services agency for Eugene and the surrounding area. And I think having a place that offers temporary nighttime shelter, meaning not housed in a building, and access during the day is a needed next step. These programs, the Dusk Till Dawn and the Rest Stop, are meant to be temporary shelter for the residents, not necessarily temporary programs of the city of Eugene. I think we need these stopgap measures until we have greater capacity in the form of buildings where we can provide low barrier shelter for those in need. We have 2 rest stops located side by side right now. They've been operating that way for a number of years, and that seems to have worked. So this proposal, and as I'm hearing it, is to have 2 Dusk Till Dawn programs on the same site, but they are separate Dusk Till Dawn sites. And I would actually like to hear from Terry McDonald of St. Vincent de Paul, if we could give him a few minutes to address us about the proposal.
I think that would be great. Can Terry come to the table?
Done deal, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilor Surratt. And I don't want to dig into your 3 minutes. We are very much in a period of transition. This is a period of time when we're doing things that are not usual. And if you'll remember back the many years when we started with the Lindholm Center period and an alternate to the mission in terms of day services for homeless, or the First Place Family Center and the night shelter, all those were experiments. The car camping program out in West Eugene was an experiment. The Dusk to Dawn was an experiment. And I'll be honest with you, in some of those circumstances, we were pretty terrified because it was an uncharted territory that we were heading in toward. Right now, we're moving into another uncharted territory with dealing with this large number of human beings, each one of them with their own special needs, in a somewhat ungoverned system that they've got currently to move to a more structured. So I believe we can move forward, and I believe that we can find a way to be successful with a new program style. But understanding that, as Commissioner Clark, or Councilor Clark pointed out, I moved you up. Didn't promote you. Sorry about that. You know, as he pointed out, we are not trying to create permanent solutions in tents. One of the things that's been wonderful working with the county directly is that we're moving on to trying to find ways to move people out of these life situations and into different life situations with the navigators that we've hired to do this job. So it is not to try and keep people just in tents. And it is not to try and create just kind of a homeless service programs on vacant properties on 99. It's actually to try and move people on. But I will tell you, it will be a very interesting adventure that we're going to embark upon if you would do fund this.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you framing it as kind of the next step in our taking some risks to figure out how we can serve people better. So, I mean, I think we are motivated by the idea of service and understanding that we are institutions with liabilities and you need to work within a certain framework. But I think we also need to recognize, and I hear in what you're saying, that the human beings we are trying to serve, that framework may not be appropriate for them, and we need to think about how we can alter the framework to make it more appropriate. So that's what I appreciate.
And we're coming back to council and hoping that they understand that we're trying to evolve a model that's most humane and compassionate to the people involved, but it will not necessarily be the system that we see today.
Right. So just, I'll finish up here real quick. I do have concern about hearing that there are families with children at the site and wanting to know what kind of more appropriate placement might be offered to those families and if that's happened.
So I appreciate that. I spoke with Lieutenant Mozan today, and he's been the liaison to the camp. And what I learned is that they have been very actively working to get the children out of the camp, and then also to find a place for the family that was car camping in particular on the outside. And what I understand is that the family that was car camping will be moving to an alternate location. They're trying to help support that, and that the children that were on the camp have been moved off. But I'd be happy to have Lieutenant Mozan come up and give any other update to that that's needed.
I'm sorry, I was trying to get some intel in terms of terminology, but we had I'm Doug Mozan here. We had a family that was camping at the front of the camp under the eave. They were not actually inside the fence of the camp, in a tent and in a car. It's a mother, father, and two small children, a toddler and a baby. This family is placed currently in some temporary housing. I'm not sure exactly which program, but it was arranged by the county through some active wrangling resources, and then there's some other solutions being sought as well on their behalf. This family was unique in the sense that they had children. We haven't seen other kids on the site, but there they were. We have a current active number of car campers out front. I don't know if there are any kids in any of those cars, as several of them have shown up in the last few days.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to thank the city staff and St. Vincent de Paul for all the work that you've done to create an alternative to where we left off at the last meeting. That didn't work for me at all, but this solution does, and I'm supportive of it. The reason I voted no on the dusk to dawn first motion that we had last meeting was because I wanted to have 24/7 wraparound services, and I thought we would take that up as the next agenda item, but we didn't. We just kind of moved on. And then came back and voted on the money, which I thought we were going the wrong direction, so I voted no on that, hoping that we would come back to this. This is why I was talking to the mayor about creating another meeting where we could fix this. And so I very much appreciate all the work that's gone on in just a few days to make this solution come forward. I guess my original motion on the rest stop was that it was actually just that. It was going to be a rest stop, and where people would rest for a while in the evening and then go away and come back. But as you'll recall, the advocates didn't like that idea. They wanted more things like my original motion, which was Opportunity Village. So we changed it back to kind of mini Opportunity Villages, and with some of those same attributes. And but we kept the name. So the name doesn't make any sense anymore. So rest stops weren't really rest stops. They were small Opportunity Villages. And so, and then Dusk to Dawn came along. But all of that is they were all experiments, trying to figure out how to work our way through this. Nobody had ever done any of these things like that. Nobody had done an Opportunity Village before. In fact, that's why we became national leaders on how to do that, because it was very innovative and new, and same with the rest stops. So people have copied our model after that, but it wasn't intended to be the be-all, end-all permanent solution. And I guess permanent's a matter of perspective and proximity to the camp, too, I suspect. But given that it's these are all very relatively new, and as Terry McDonald from St. Vincent de Paul said, we're kind of feeling our way through this, and this is an experiment. I suspect that as our efforts mature in this stuff, and as we figure out new pilots and new things to do, that we'll get better, we'll get more sophisticated, and it'll look very different than it does today. So I don't see this as permanent, but I do appreciate very much the work that's gone into helping craft a solution that will work for right now.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you. Like Alan, I really want to thank you for taking another run at this. I think we got part of the way there, but not quite far enough. And I was sad that we didn't have enough time. We couldn't finish the conversation, so I'm glad you've persevered and we've all persevered, and we're now back to hopefully complete the conversation. I, too, am supportive of these motions because I believe the current situation is not tenable. We can't leave it the way it is. It isn't working. And so we need to figure out what a solution might be, and I think the effort that's being done is really good. To me, there's two elements that we're really trying to work through right now. The first one is the issue of health, safety, management of the shelter arrangement. Issues we've talked about before. We need to, whatever system we need to put in place, it has to ensure that it maintains the health, safety, security, and management of the site. And as I mentioned before, you start going to 100 people, that's a huge thing. So figuring out a way to manage the number of people and then be in a situation that has the kind of oversight that needs to be. And I think there's an element of shared, operation of the camp, but there needs to be somebody with the professional expertise to run it. I mean, I think that's a given. And I'm glad that St. Vincent de Paul is willing to revise their model, to say, yeah, we've had this model, but we can revise it to find new ways of doing things, which gets into my second topic, and that is we have a dusk to dawn model, and the model has worked, but basically there's some challenges with that model. And so trying to come up with not a replacement model, but an additional model that can work in other situations. And I think that's what we're talking about here. This is an additional form of shelter. And I agree with everyone here who says shelter is temporary. Shelter is temporary. Housing is permanent. And so I often have to work in two minds. One mind is the long-term mind. How can we get people out of shelter and into housing and becoming more self-sufficient? But I also have a mind that is here and now, as Alan says. It's the triage mind. It's the mind that says we've got cold weather and we have to deal with situations right now. And I can figure out later on ways to incorporate those two minds. But right now, my mind has to be focused on the here and the now, the immediate. And so I think this is a good, I don't want to call it a compromise. I think it's more of an evolution. And I think for me, it satisfies the health, safety, and management issues that shelter needs to have. Because, yeah, I've been hearing of the complaints, the emergency services, the police calls, and so we do need to have something that can bring that back into control. So I like the notion of having a 24-hour model as one of our tools, and if we can figure out a way to incorporate that. I know it requires more money, and I know it requires more resources, and I think if the model can be viable for a 24-hour system, I'm absolutely open to talking about what that might look like.
Great. Thank you. Greg?
Thanks, Mayor. Couple of things. what exactly is the safety and security plan for these sites? Do we have one? Do we know what we're going to do in terms of some of the issues that have already been brought up with, you know, vandalism, campers being victimized, surrounding businesses and other properties being victimized by a handful of people? What is our safety plan to deal with some of this? And then also, what are our plans to deal with those campers who have health issues that are, beyond the, walking across the street kind of deal, but have serious health issues that need some attention in the intermediate part? And then finally, and maybe Steve Manella can answer this question in a better way, is this is an iterative process right now. We're going from one point to another point to another point. At some point, we have to look at what the long game is. And we've been talking about low barrier shelter for a couple of years now. But what does that exactly mean over the arc of the next few months and moving into the next year or two? Because the way I'm looking at this is not sustainable. We can't keep doing this, every 2, 3, 4 months, because the same thing is going to be there in March as it is in December and January, except the weather will be a little bit better, a lot wetter, but a little bit better, a little warmer. So what is our long game after we kind of doing this patch over piece that we're doing right now?
Councilor Evans, I'd like to invite Terry McDonald and Steve Manila up to the table to respond to your questions, if that's okay. Well,
yeah.
Terry, do you want to start with the security of the camp questions?
Councilor Evans, we've, of course, worked off of the Dusk to Dawn model for the last several years. And in that model, which is on the northern site, I think you'll notice that there have not been a lot of police presence. There has not been a lot of required services from emergency vehicles and so forth, because it's a managed site. The site that is currently on the county property is not a managed site in terms of an agency or group. It may be a self-governing village or whatever, but the point is that we require and need to make sure that we're providing the appropriate services and also the appropriate management to make ourselves a good neighbor in the neighborhood. So I do not expect that to change as we evolve toward this newer model. Likewise, people that have multiple health issues, we're thinking about taking the current Lindholm site and where the original Dusk to Dawn was, and seeing if we could have some emergency tents there that would be for people with more fragile and health needs that would be appropriate on that site. So we're trying to think our way through, but remember...
Medical MASH tents.
Yeah, medical MASH tents, basically to make sure that they're closer to the hub of services than they would be up on the other site, so that they don't have to cross the street to deal with that.
Councilor Evans, I appreciate your questions. The health and safety of the folks on the site and the businesses is very important to both the folks there and, to the county and the businesses. What we've done to date is we have a team from our public health department that includes a nurse and other environmental health and public health staff who are actively going out on site to Camp 99. We have under our Poverty and Homelessness Board, we have a healthcare committee that is staffed by Dr. Rick Kincaid, and we're looking at options to increase the amount of mobile medical services to all of the shelter sites and housing sites in the community. So that's sort of what we're doing now in the long term. I can tell you that the nurse is doing a lot of wound care. There are a lot of issues with people's feet. We're also doing immunization on the site and taking care of respiratory problems, skin rashes, and other kinds of things that are coming up. The other piece is that we're looking at other sites. We participate in with Shelter Care and Peace Health in a medical respite program. Unfortunately, that program doesn't have enough capacity. There are people who are out at the Camp 99 site who should be in a medical respite environment. We did have a survey team of our human service staff and providers out today getting additional information about folks and their needs. And part of what we're trying to accomplish in the transition is to get some people who have very critical needs who are not going to be well in the dawn to dawn, the dusk to dawn environment, in that kind of a shelter environment, into a better place. So we're trying to keep our commitment there.
So do we have enough resources to, and I'm not assuming that this is in this particular motion with the $150,000, but to, address some of these critical needs? Where would we be getting the funding? Is that a combination of county resources and city resources, or is it county resources?
What we've done to date with this project is that most of the costs have been split between the county and the city. We did put in a funding request to the Oregon Department of Housing and Community Services, and I've heard that they will probably approve that request. And the intent of that is we can use that resource two ways. We can either defray the costs to the city and the county for what we have in place, or we can use that resource to find avenues for some people out of the current environment. So that's something that we haven't discussed yet as staff. I've been waiting to get a formal commitment from the state. Over the long term, the good news is, under the Affordable Care Act, most of the folks that we're working with are eligible for some sort of health care. And in fact, what we've been doing at the county with our FUSE program, or Frequent User Service Engagement program, we've been actually working with the healthcare community to reduce the cost to the healthcare community by providing health care for folks.
Are you finished, Greg?
I've only got 15 seconds. I'm done, Mayor, for the moment.
All right. Okay, thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming back with something so quickly that really addressed basically the major concerns I think that we and the residents at the camp have been expressing. I'm wondering what the timeline on the ground looks like. So if this were to pass and the county was like, yes, we're okay with this, what are we looking at?
Well, I think I'll invite Terry McDonald back up to help talk about that. We're hoping is that the timeline can be pretty quick because we do have that infrastructure that we invested in, and we'll utilize that for kind of getting this up and going. But I'll turn it over to Terry.
Thank you, Councilor. The site on the north side does require some preparatory work to get a space available for 80 people. We also need to have staff, because if we're moving to a different model, and we are actually waiting for this meeting to find out whether the people we hired, we should continue to keep employed. But we believe that we could meet the target of somewhere in the first week of January.
For both of the?
Both.
Oh, wow, that's pretty quick, okay.
Yeah.
That is all the questions.
We move kind of fast.
Well, that's great.
Okay. Emily?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to the staff for working all weekend. I also worked most of the weekend. I spent a couple hours talking to the homeless advocates, and I was out at the site, the campsite this afternoon. So in the beginning of January, when Camp 99 closes, what happens if people won't leave? Are there going to be arrests?
Well, that, the camp, as I said, will transition, the 30 to 60-day camp. And so the intent is that, that they're able to remediate the site, which will mean that people will need to exit the site. And I would be happy to have Steve Manila come up if you have additional questions that he might be able to answer.
I just know some people, you know, don't want to leave. So what happens?
Councilor Simple, I think you raised a very good question, and you know, we know from the beginning that everybody deserves to have a place to call home, and we wish that we could provide a home for everybody who's unsheltered. So that's sort of our North Star on this. I think what we're trying to accommodate with this is that we have sort of a three-prong approach. We're working on solutions to get additional camping sites and additional rest stop sites. I know Commissioner Farr will have some more discussion about campsites. We have a session in January, early January, with our County Parks Department, and people are continuing to work on alternatives where people can be. We know that there are people who have dogs, for example. They have animals, and they need a place where animals can be. So that's one group. Additionally, I mentioned earlier that, you know, we're hoping that we're going to be able to help some people with some very high needs find somewhere else to be. And then, you know, ultimately with the 20-person camp or rest stop option, and then the 80-person, that accommodates about 100 people. You know, from my experience in being in similar situations in the past, where we've had a large number of people, and this was some time ago, that we had to find solutions for. We had about, I would say, 25% of the people who just disbanded, didn't want, when we had resources available for them, didn't want the resources in the form that we were able to provide them. So the greater problem is that we know, and this was in the TAC report, you know, we know we have about 1,000 to 1,200 folks who are unsheltered every night. And we're talking here about how we can help, you know, these 100 or so people that are on the county site. And so what we'll do is we'll do the best we can in the most compassionate way we can. You know, at the end of the day, when there's some agreement on the date, there'll be, we want to provide advance notice. You know, the site will be posted with information about the options that people have, and we'll continue to have social service and healthcare staff go out there and see if we can transition in the best manner we can, the most compassionate way we can. You know, we can't make promises. We can only do the best we can. And I've been very humbled and very pleased that, you know, the combination of the county, the city, the public works staff, the nonprofit community, and everybody involved, that we're putting in the extra effort, and we're trying to do, you know, the best we can. Difficult situation.
I am assuming good intentions from
Yes.
everyone. And if people won't leave, will they be arrested?
That is a question, again, that, you know, that I can't answer in my position in the county. I know that there is that potential, and there was that potential when folks were cleared from the butterfly lot, and we didn't have any arrests, and so it's really something that probably is better answered by law enforcement, and is also going to be informed by the decision that the county administrator and the county board make in regard to how they want to conduct that that part of the transition.
I'm a little bit confused in that this was a county camp issue in the beginning at Butterfly, and it moved to county land on Camp 99. And now both the Dusk to Dawn and the Dawn to Dawn and the new model rest stop are all going to be on St. Vincent's land. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So now it's back on city land.
No, it's St. Vincent de Paul property.
Okay.
And so the programs that are being proposed, especially the experimental programs, they'll either be at the 717 site or the 450 site.
So the counties just kind of stepped out of it then. It went from county to St. Vinny's.
No, I would say that the county still continues to be very engaged, and I can't say enough, quite frankly. I'm so grateful for our partners at the county. They have been doing amazing work to try to address the challenges at the camp. And what we hear and from our county partners is that a continued need to continue to look for alternate options. And so in the information, the statement that I read from the county administrator, it speaks to that and their commitment to continue to look for how best to use that site or other sites to assist people that are in need of emergency shelter.
And at the Dusk to Dawn, the Dawn to Dawn, and so on, how much is the county contributing with our money? How's that working out?
What the county had committed to previously was when we were looking at the 525 option for the Dusk to Dawn is that we were going to split the cost of the 80 beds 50-50. And from what I've heard from the county administrator, the intent is to continue to do that.
So the infrastructure that's going there, that's the big tents we bought for the City Hall lot?
That is correct.
Did I hear anything? I thought I heard maybe previously that you could have some individual tents at the Dawn to Dawn, or is it all the big kind?
That's a good question. So there's the 80 bed site that we have that has the day access capability. And in addition is that micro Dawn to Dawn type unit.
So new rest stop-y thing.
Yeah, rest stop, micro, anyway. So what we have there is people will have the ability to bring their own pop-up tents, if you will, and they'll be able to stay in those.
And how are you going to pick the lucky ones to go there?
I think that St. Vincent de Paul, in talking with them this morning, they have a very structured way of helping people get into the programs that are best suited for them. And so they will be doing some work. I'm sure that will be informed also by the work that Steve Manella and his team are doing with triaging and understanding the needs of the campers.
It's really important to me that people don't get displaced that don't want to be, such as with the dogs or going through detox or seniors and the medically challenged. I'm also really concerned about the safety of the camp until the end of the year. We've heard a lot of reports that it's not feeling very safe, that there are two different populations, the ones I just mentioned, the fragile ones, and the partying ones, and that these don't go very well together. And I'm also concerned that there's no way to get anybody to leave. I've heard that there's 10 to 25 people that are considered dangerous and are not helping other people to feel safe. So it's incredibly important to me that it succeed until it ends in whatever form it ends. And I'm wondering how we're going to ensure the safety of that site.
I'll start, and then if you wanted to add something. So one of the things that we have are two designated liaisons to the camp. One is a city staff person, Lieutenant Mozan, and the other is Linda Bravo from Lane County. And they go out to the camp on a regular basis, sometimes a daily basis, either together or separately, and check in on the camp over the weekend as well to make sure that their needs are being met. In addition, that if there are any public safety needs that come up, that they're aware of or that come to the attention of others at the camp. Or the other thing I would say is that the Lindholm Center right now is really providing a great resource in the sense that people that are going over, if they need help or if people at St. Vincent de Paul see that there's a need for some assistance, that they're flagging that. So it's another set of people that are helping manage the safety of that camp. But we will continue to do what we're doing today, which is as much oversight as we can possibly provide, and I'll let Steve speak to some of the things that we're doing regarding medical and public health.
I'll speak to the safety piece, and that's something that I expect will be taken up tomorrow or next by the County Board of Commissioners. Currently what we have is we have a security company that's providing some staffing for there I think there's an interest in looking at the contract that Public Works put in place and seeing if there could be additional security. The second thing that I'd mention is there is a procedure in place for trespassing people from the property. It's not perfect, because Lane County doesn't have any staff that are presently on the site, and St. Vincent de Paul is not currently managing the site, but the county administrator has written a memo and has given authority to St. Vincent de Paul should they be alerted of a situation that would rise to that occasion to call law enforcement. I think I have that correct? Almost? Yeah, very close? Okay, thanks, Pete. But that's what we have in place now, and I think that, again, our hope is that what we can do is transition to a more safe situation, get people who are more vulnerable out of the site. I think to date, identifying folks that are going to go to dusk to dawn, and then I think that probably your lieutenant could probably give a better read on the other aspects of the safety on the site since he's there daily.
I'd like to point out that when police are on the scene, they're very visible and behavior changes, and that in a camp such as this, much of the behavior is unseen. It's intense. And I'd also put forth that what is visible to outsiders is not the whole truth of what's going on inside. I'll be talking more.
Okay. I have Mike. We can start a second round. I know, Mike, you want one? So take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. Almost by definition, this is just my opinion, I'm going to state, almost by definition, for someone to be in the temporary or long-term condition of homelessness is to be unwell, whether they're financially unwell, whether they're emotionally unwell, whether they're physically unwell. That's a condition that I would say is a reasonable way to describe that condition. I believe personally that we as a community, we as a city government ought to do everything we can to help people who are homeless who want to get well. What is really difficult about this conversation, about this particular, is the fact that we won't have the conversation about the people who don't want to get well. And let me try and say that in a different way, perhaps. Steve went to a great degree of explanation to talk about the compassion involved in the work and to talk about how there are folks who have elected not to receive services in the manner provided. Chris talked about the importance of how we manage this facility. Terry used the word govern what occurs in the facility. I'm of the mind that we need to have a structure and that we need to have a structured management in place. But what then we don't end up talking about are the folks who are in that reality who won't be governed, who won't accept structure, or who have said, no, I'm not going to comply. And there are several of them. And I think that's the difficult part that we never talk about and why this problem continues to be difficult. One of the issues for me is that, and why some of the difficulties of this are going to be some people are going to end up not being allowed to be in the camp. They're going to, I don't think you ever got a square answer, not that they didn't try, but what happens when people say, no, I'm not leaving? What will happen next? That's the part we're not addressing. And forgive me, I agree that we should be doing all we can to help people who want to get well. And I believe that the shelter versus housing idea is a reasonable one. But I believe that the more we continue to create camps like this, it creates a reality of us not to look at better long-term solutions to the problem. The more we can alleviate the short-term emergency, the more we put off yet again for another year an actual fix to this problem, an actual indoor facility where people can be served if they want to be, and we can deal with this problem differently. And I don't want to keep continuing to put Band-Aids on this wound. I want to actually help people who want to get well to get well. So I don't know if I can agree to keep continuing this. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Betty next, but I do just want to jump in on Mike's comments, but actually Greg had preceded those comments with this same kind of concern about one step after another. And I do just want to remind all of you that we have a joint meeting with the county commissioners on January 22nd to hear the final TAC report. And the purpose of that report is to help us configure what a permanent public shelter would look like, how it might integrate with our existing services. And part of that is improving that whole access to services, a continuum of care, and also create that hard structure. So we are on that pathway, and what we learn through this temporary but new pilot program can help inform how we look at that permanent shelter. So this does fit into that decision-making trajectory. So just encourage you to recognize you're having this conversation today. You will have the next step of this conversation in January in an even more robust way. So, okay, Betty, do you need a second round?
Thank you. We seem to keep doing temporary things. By now, I thought we would be well on the way to having a shelter, which we voted for some time ago, a year and a half ago or something like that. I find myself agreeing with Mike again. Which is, I don't know what to say about that, but I think we do need a place with a floor and a ceiling. Doesn't have to be fancy. And we also need to put some of our incentive money, which we keep throwing around, into a single-room occupancy. Some people who are homeless could probably afford to rent a room without a bathroom. And there used to be places like that. I've lived in a place like that when I was 20 years old. And you can, it's a lot better than being out in the rain and the mud. To have and if we had places that, a shelter, two things. We need a shelter for people who can't rent anything, but most people have some kind of income. And if there were single rooms that they could rent, maybe they could do that. And I still think we need a gathering place downtown. A part of the problem for people, for citizens, is they don't like to see people with their junk on the sidewalk and in the library. And I don't suppose the people who are there like being there either. But people need an indoor place to get warm and talk to other people, have a cup of coffee maybe, and it needs to be downtown. And I don't know if we're making any progress toward that or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire, do you want a second round?
Well, yeah, so, the mayor just reminded us that we're having a work session about a permanent shelter in early January with the county commission. This will be our second one. We got a preliminary draft report some months ago. So we are doing the work towards that goal. It's not been forgotten. It's not been shelved. It was important for for the county to ask for this report from TAC so that when we take on this very big project for our community to build a permanent low barrier shelter, we are doing it with the benefit of expertise that looked at our current system, looked at the gaps, looked at how we operate, and is giving us a recommendation so that when we are ready to build something permanent, we do it with the best information about what is needed and what will be viable. So we are on that path. I don't understand these complaints from my fellow counselors that we seem to have forgotten that idea. It's on our tentative agenda for January, and it's an important conversation that, takes time to get there, but we're getting there.
Thank you. Alan?
Pass, Mayor.
Chris?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the TAC report because I had written down TAC and put a square around it because it is important and it's going to bring a lot of recommended solutions together both in the short term and the long term, and that's what I'm most interested in because whether it has a floor or a ceiling or walls and it's a shelter, it's still temporary. And as the TAC people have said, you can build a 75-bed low barrier shelter. That's a great thing when you're in the short-term mind, but it's not really the solution in the long-term mind. They're going to come with recommendations for the long-term that I think will be great and will incorporate a lot of housing. And so I think that's great. But back to the conversation about what we do with this current thing, and it'll be great when we get to the voting part, is the notion of how we can ensure that we're proactive with supervision until January. It's come up with a couple of other people. We need to make sure that safety and security, to the degree we can, is maintained until we get to January. We can bring the new model online, and I think that will be very great. Another question that we're kind of dancing around a little bit, and there's two different ways you can look at it, is the notion of what is a reasonable accommodation. And I have a long-term mind thought about what reasonable accommodation is, and then you can get into a whole list of things that you would try to do to reasonably accommodate the needs of people. And then you could say, when I'm in my triage mind, reasonable accommodation becomes a much more narrow and defined list. I think some things that could reasonably be in the short-term reasonable accommodation conversation might be pets. What is a reasonable accommodation around pets? And so, but the list is not exhaustive, and it's not, well, I want to have pink sheets instead of blue sheets, or I want to do this instead of that. And I don't think that's what people are asking, but we need to be very mindful that we can only accommodate up to a certain point. And so if somebody says, well, I'm not going to move to your camp because it doesn't have X, Y, Z that I want. If it's a pet, let's figure out how we can deal with that. If it's something that to me doesn't fall within the purview of the kinds of reasonable accommodations that a city needs to be concerned with, then that's a different conversation, one we need to have later on, maybe when we have our TAC conversation. I don't want to sound cruel, but triage often sounds cruel because you're having to make very difficult choices in a very short amount of time that affect people's lives. And for that reason, I'm trying to put it in those terms. And so I don't want the conversation to suddenly turn into a conversation about who is worthy and who is unworthy. I think it's very important to not let this conversation slip into well, we should help the worthy and we shouldn't help the unworthy, because nobody ever is going to have a definition of who is worthy and who is unworthy. But I think we can talk about what are the things that we can do around the condition, but also around the behaviors that we won't accept. And I think the plans we have and that we can put in place can absolutely work within that model, that we can be compassionate, we can be triage, we can be carrying around the condition that we need to deal with, even as we have to have enforcement options for the behaviors that simply won't work. Whether it's people refusing to live in the situation that we've set up, or want to do something different, I will try to accommodate that as much as I can, and I will ask you to try to accommodate that as much as you can. But I think in this specific conversation, it's more of a triage conversation. So I can't really have a wide-ranging, reasonable accommodation conversation, but I do want to have that conversation.
Mayor, this is Christy. Could I add a couple of things?
Please.
So you brought up two topics that I wanted to address. One is pets, and I'm going to invite Terry McDonald back up again to talk a little bit about pets, because we understand that's a major, major concern. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that we're really fortunate in this community to have very, very passionate advocates and nonprofits that really want to help be partners in solving the need that we have in the community. I had a chance to meet with several of them last week. They have an abundance of really great ideas that we're going to continue to look to partner with them on and continue to move those forward. We're just, quite frankly, we're moving pretty quick on a lot of different things and want to continue to stay in close contact with them. Lieutenant Mozan stays in contact with them on a regular basis. And so I wanted to assure this group, Councilor talked a little bit about alternative options, and we want to continue to be part of those solutions as well. Terry, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chris. I want to talk a little bit about pets, because obviously that's an important item for people living anywhere, whether you're housed or not. Our position on pets is that, you know, as long as the pet is under control, where it's not a danger to others or to other animals, that's an accommodation we accept. When an animal demonstrates that it is not under control, and when it is aggressive against other people, then it becomes a liability to the owner and to the community around them. So understanding that we've had a number of incidents across the street about animals being aggressive, we do have to draw the line at the safety associated with individuals that have a pet that is not under control. So that will be one of the red lines that we can't go past. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're setting up a dangerous situation for people. Cool. The second thing is that we are not the experts on rest stops. We are not that expert. We do not do rest stops. What St. Vincent de Paul does is the dusk to dawn, and now it's the dawn to dawn or dusk to dusk or whatever. And we will try and accommodate and adapt. But I would encourage you to understand that the self-governing form that is associated with rest stops, there are other providers in the community that do a wonderful job on that, and we support those activities, and we believe that they've done an excellent job. But that's not the model we work under. The model we work under is one where we invite participation, but we understand that there are rules, that we have to keep a safe situation for all people there, and we want people to move on. It's one of the things that we asked about this time is that we wanted some funds available for us to allow for navigators to help people move through this system and not be stuck in this system. People need to move to a different life situation than a tent.
Thank you. Greg, do you need another round?
Yeah, Mayor, thanks. I think what you're sensing from me is the frustration of having sat here for the last 5 years as a city councilor, and some of you have been here longer than I have, and we've been grappling with this issue. And when I talk about the long term, I know we're going to be meeting with the county next month again and going over the TAC report and those recommendations and seeing what the next steps are to move forward. But I think my sense of frustration is with the fact that, you know, St. Vincent proposed a boys' shelter over in my ward, which was summarily rejected by the neighbors and very vocal about their rejection of that location. The same thing happened when LTD tried to locate 3 car camp locations on property off of River Road in Santa Clara, the old Santa Clara School. So for us to move forward with a low barrier shelter is not going to be an easy lift. just location-wise, engineering, construction, and then we got to figure out, you know, the amount that we're going to have to set aside every year to, you know, manage and run it. So, you know, the way that I'm looking at this long term is, are we going to be here another 4 or 5 years before we can get to a, you know, a solution, a shelter, some kind of shelter, and that shelter will only be a partial solution to what the need is that is out there. So we're going to have multiple pieces to the solution to make this work. It will not just be erecting a shelter and then we're done with it. That's not going to be the case. We're going to go on with this for a long time. So I want us to really, you know, in the next year, get down to the nitty-gritty about what that whole system is really going to look like. Is that going to be, that's going to be, you know, a shelter, that's going to be the Eugene mission, that's going to be rest stops, it's going to be tiny, you know, Conestogas, whatever the case may be. I'm out of time, so.
Okay. Thank you. Jennifer?
I'm going to pass.
All right. Emily?
Thank you. So the people that need extra help transitioning, the medically fragile, how soon is that transitioning going to start? Is that right away, or is that not until the first of the year? Would people be moving out sooner?
I think that's been in progress, especially even over the last period of time that people have been in the camp. You've heard about people that have transitioned to Dusk to Dawn and to other service areas. But Steve Manella, if you have anything else to share on that?
The first action that was taken was to set up an additional tent at the Dusk to Dawn site for people who have medical needs, and so that was the initial action. The more recent action has been the work of our public health and the social service folks. So today, you know, we got additional information so that we can work on what we are calling a triage of about 33 people that were identified and surveyed at the site. And so tomorrow morning, our staff is going to sit down and review the additional information that we have and then pull in other people as we have. We pulled in other social service providers, other healthcare folks to look and take a look and see what we can do. So we're hoping to spend the next week and the time up to the Christmas holiday doing that, and then commencing again right after the beginning of the year.
So some more people will be moving out of there soon?
It's my hope that that will happen, yes.
It's my hope that it will happen too. I think that's one of the things that's scary, is if something happens to one of those people out there. I really want this camp to make it to the end of the year. So we can't trespass people out of there because there's not enough county staff to do it. It seemed like the bottom line. Well, to trespass somebody out, had to have somebody come. Could you tell me how that works again, please?
So the situation with trespasses is sort of complicated, and that is that it's a county-run site, and so the county administrator is the one with the authority to trespass individuals, and really the only one with the authority. So he and the county attorney are the ones that hear the stories that are presented to them, either from me or from St. Vinny's. They could theoretically hear from them as well. And then they make a decision whether or not to trespass. The problem here is that sometimes behaviors happen at times when not everybody is super reachable, and there is no on-site management of the camp in a reliable fashion, where you have somebody who has the authority and the the oversight with the ability to trespass. The site has no on-site security. Well, there is on-site security sometimes, but they're on the outside. And it's just such a big project with 100 or so residents that it's not the easiest thing to manage. To Councilor Evans and your questions earlier, the behaviors are the things that require law enforcement intervention, not the status of homelessness. Some of the behaviors are frankly unpredictable. I mean, there's been folks who have been shooting up even when it's been well known that I was on site. And I don't always dress like a police officer, but they know when I'm there. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. And I'm not wearing my law enforcement hat when I'm in liaison mode. Also, to be clear, I've been trying to rather intentional about that. And yet, when a dispute erupts in my presence, which has happened, you can't really ignore it. I mean, there's stuff going on in this camp on a daily basis, inside and now outside. We had an overdose occur while we were on site doing surveys in the parking lot from one of the folks who are car camping. So the thing is continuing to simmer, if you will, and management is the only way that's going to be a tenable solution for dealing with some of the behaviors that are negative.
Has anybody been trespassed yet?
Yeah, a couple of people have been. There was one couple that was in a dispute, and he was arrested for domestic violence, and then she was acting in a disorderly fashion, so she was trespassed off the site by the county administrator.
I'm really concerned about things that aren't being seen. While the last couple weeks are happening, if you know it's really ending, I would like to see some real emphasis and respect for some self-management from that camp. I'd like to see them really step up for the last bit of time and have a council and show us that this self-management model can happen even very, very quickly. Some security, I guess, is okay, but I think that if we could rely and encourage more self-management and self-policing, and I'm not saying don't come over, I'm not saying that at all, but if we could reach out to the campers themselves to have a better security feeling, and I think to offer them that challenge and the support could help the camp right now, but also bring a model for future camps. So I really want to put some emphasis on the self-management, which isn't directed towards you, really. I'm just talking to you. What happens to downtown? This started with the butterfly protest, and it had to leave, so it went to the Camp 99, and then it came back, and it went back to Camp 99, and we lost the possibility of a place to sleep downtown, and we lost the incredibly important day center. So what's going to happen? Because people will come back downtown. So where's the resources for that? I mean, we keep hearing day center, but this is great. Have some more money, but what about the money for downtown? What about helping downtown? That's a question.
Okay, all right, I wanted to make sure. So yeah, we do have the $414,000. That was part of the Community Safety Initiative. That money is still there. We are still looking. I have a couple of sites that we're looking pretty strongly at, but as I think I might have mentioned this last week, some of the options that we're looking at have tenants involved, and it's a little bit premature to start talking about where they're located at. And we're trying to also think about how do we achieve multi-purpose use out of whatever site we have available. And so we are looking, there are dollars available for that purpose, and they will only be used for that purpose.
Okay, thanks. I hope it goes quickly, because I think they're gonna be coming. I've heard that the car camps hold 6 people, and a lot of them only have 3, and so I'm wondering what's up with that.
I would be happy to talk just a little bit about it, and if you want more information, I'd be happy to bring Terry McDonald back to the table. One of the things in talking with St. Vincent de Paul representatives this morning is that what they find is they really try, it's a very delicate microsystem, if you will, in terms of people being in a small area that get along and can be successful together. And so what they have found is that having 3 groups of people or 3 individuals on the site together seems to be sort of a magic number in terms of achieving success. And we talked to them a little bit today about would they be willing to expand on that a little bit. And I think that what we heard is they will continue to give that some thought to see if there's possibilities. Some of the sites may accommodate more, some may not be able to accommodate more. But the goal is just to really to have whatever we have in place be as successful as possible. But that's what I heard, and I'd be happy to, if Terry has anything to add, feel free to. Okay.
And Councilor, I can add to that. In speaking, right now the St. Vincent de Paul manages a number of car camp spots that are successful, very successful, and the code allows for private businesses to accept car camp setups, you know, with the car being defined as a tent or, you know, in a very liberal fashion. So communities of faith are also on the table as well, and some do, but I've had the question posed to me as to whether there was any sort of template for a success model, and that's a difficult thing. And the other thing is that we're going to need more than just what's being provided here. People are going to need to step up and provide some places for folks to go. And that's what's going to avoid your earlier question of will people be arrested? Well, not if they have a place where they want to go. They weren't arrested downtown because 99 was better. They weren't arrested in Whoville because there were other alternatives, and we negotiated our way through it.
And I appreciate all that, and I will need another round.
Okay, so I wasn't planning to do a third round, but are there others in addition? Mike, maybe you could give me a head count if there are other counselors who really need another round. I do want to mention, in response to some of the questions on the second round, which is we have 4 very specific motions on which we need to vote today that have to do with the Highway 99 camp. So, and that transition. So some of these other questions about what's happening downtown and about car camping, those are ongoing conversations, but they are not the critical issue on which we must vote today. So if you have additional questions or comments or concerns about these subjects of the vote, then I'll do another round. But I think we can postpone the continuing conversation about car camping and so on to follow-up meetings. So with that said, are there folks that absolutely need a third round?
1.5/2.
1.5/2? Okay, and who
yes.
are those?
Me and Emily.
Yeah, okay.
I'm half.
Okay, Mike, go, and then Emily, and then we'll go
And
through
Alan,
those.
apparently. I thought I looked at him. Sorry, so we have 3.
Okay, all right.
I still haven't heard.
Take it away, Mike.
Sorry, what's that?
Move to extend 10 minutes.
Second.
You need more than 10.
All in favor of extending for 10 minutes?
We don't need half an hour at least.
We'll do it again.
All right.
All in favor of extending? We have a motion on the table, am I right?
Yeah. Voted.
All in favor of extending the meeting for 10 minutes? I can't see your hand, so someone has to count for me.
That's 7 there.
You got 7.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, carry on, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I still haven't heard an answer. I've asked a really direct question, and I know it's hard to talk about stuff that it doesn't sound compassionate. I think it's compassionate, personally, to help those and to address those who don't want to comply and how we deal with that. But I still haven't heard what is it we will do when the folks who can't go, when we transition everything available here to managed services, which I agree is a wiser choice for the whole. But there are several people who won't be able to take advantage of that. And then there are people who have decided they don't want to, and they're not going to, and will likely come back downtown to protest. How will we address the folks who can't be served and the folks who won't be served?
So I'll just speak a little bit. I think that same question was responded to by the city manager last week, and what he has said is that if there are people that are illegally camping, we will enforce that. With respect to the 525 Highway 99 site, that will be a decision for the county administrator and commissioners as to whether or not they want to trust people from that site. If so, our law enforcement staff will support that effort.
I have asked a couple county commissioners about what I believe, if they will discuss with me what they would likely do. We had the statement from the county, but I haven't heard any county commissioners who had said that they'd likely kick people out. And I don't like the way the camp is currently operating, but I'm not sure I like any of the options very much because it doesn't get to solving the problem the way I would have suggested we do. I don't believe the commissioners will close that camp. I don't know that to be a fact based on the ones I've talked to. So I'm not sure how I'm voting on any of these at the moment. Thank you, Mayor. I'm done.
Okay. And Emily, another round?
I think Alan didn't have.
Alan was first. Yeah.
Oh, Alan. Oh, Alan. I'm sorry. I missed Alan. Alan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I think one of the most interesting points of the TAC report, preliminary report, was that a shelter is not a solution and will not decrease homelessness. Grand total of 0 people taken off the homelessness rolls. It doesn't help decrease homelessness because it's a transitional place, a temporary thing for people getting to something more stable. So a low barrier 50 to 75 foot facility is a necessary part of our services that we need to provide, but it doesn't decrease homelessness. And that was one of the most interesting points of the whole TAC report. And I think people are going to be disappointed if they have this shelter as the silver bullet part of what's going to happen. That's not what's going to happen. We're probably not going to build this nice, big, huge bricks and mortars place that's going to cost a ton of money and even more to operate. That's not what's probably in the cards. The other point I wanted to make is that after dealing with this for 25 years in my case, I just wanted to point out St. Vincent de Paul and what an incredible asset they are, and in particular Terry McDonald and the work that he's been doing all these years. I think we'd be in a world of hurt if Terry wasn't around and doing the things that he's doing and making sure that St. Vincent de Paul does the things that it does, which is help an enormous amount of people. So I think we owe a great debt of gratitude to Terry and to St. Vincent de Paul, and so does our entire community for that matter. So thank you, Terry, for all the work that you do and all the stuff that St. Vinny's does.
Thank you. And Emily.
Thank you. We haven't talked about the money yet, and money's always important. It looks like there's about $20,000 for the new model, not a rest stop thing. Is that correct?
Actually, that number's probably closer to $40,000.
Well, this blows me away because the other rest stops got $25,000 to divvy up between them. How did this one get so much money?
Well, one of the things I would say is that our intention is that we're experimenting with a new system that is providing 24/7 access, and it's more of a dawn-to-dawn program and not as much of a rest stop program. Right. Yeah, sorry.
I guess I'm not clear what the difference is if rest stop, because a rest stop you have to leave for a few hours in the day? What's the difference between the new model and the old model, and how come the new model costs so much more money? Yeah, but the other ones are 18.7.
And it's versus not.
I'll let Terry speak to that.
Rest stops are not professionally run. They're not run by staff. The 24/7 is run by a staff. Staff costs money.
And how much self-management will they have under this staff situation?
Very little.
Well, that's not the, the model that we've been working towards. So $40,000 is a lot of money to spend on something that's not the ask from the homeless and that would save us money in the long term. So I'm not so crazy about that idea. Anybody else got anything to say about that amount of money from answers?
I'd be happy to provide you more detail about the costing for that. And so we've been in a very fluid situation trying to find a solution, and we'll continue to work with our partners at St. Vincent de Paul to find out, if there's a way to streamline the costs for the programs. The program costs for 50% of the 80-bed plus the micro dawn-to-dawn program. Sorry, I'm still getting used to referencing that way, is about $150,000. Total.
Mayor?
I wasn't quite done yet.
Correct. I just want to make sure that Emily is done. Emily's still in the queue. I just want to make sure she's still.
I am not finished. I'm sure everyone's thrilled about that. So I am concerned about the money, and I'm really concerned about how it's spent. We have overlooking boards for transportation and other pots of money, and I would really like to see a good accounting of where the money goes. There is concern as well as gratitude about St. Vinny's being a monopoly, and we do not have other providers. I'd like to have more. I want to keep St. Vinny, but I really want open, honest, transparent accounting of the money that we pay St. Vinny's, and not just for this program. I think that would go a long way to soothing some angst and making sure we are putting our money where we want it to go. And especially in this situation, if it's new programs, I want to know what's happening. And I also hope that there's still money, not from this, I understand, although there's $50,000 left in this pot, to support the rest stops and further rest stops. Nightingale and I believe also CSS have said that they are capable and want to run more rest stops, but they cannot do it without funding, and they haven't been getting funded in the past. So fair is fair. I hope we'll do that too.
And I will add, one of the motions that was made maybe about a month ago to come back with some suggested revisions to the established rest stop program and the Dusk to Dawn programs. You asked staff to come back with suggestions on some potential code amendments you can make. And one of those possible amendments is to amend the current language regarding the rest stop program about some of the limitations of how the city's funds can be used. So that will be part of that comes back to you and gives you an option to maybe broaden that out.
And to be sure about this money, I thought we gave $100,000 to continue Lindholm, although I'm hearing that they said they would, they're not washing sleeping bags, and there's not enough laundry, and there's not enough showers, so I'm not sure my money's being spent well there. But that was $100,000. I thought the $150,000 was for both the mini Dawn to Dawn and the 80-bed Dawn to Dawn. Those are both included in that?
That is correct. And it's right now our cost for the Lindholm Center is $76,000, but you authorize us up to $100,000.
Right. So. But we don't have to spend that all, right? Mm-hmm. Yay. So there might be 50, 75 left from this that could go to further help. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Greg, did you have one more round?
I have a quick question.
Okay.
Who's liable for this? I mean, is it both the county and the city? And then I would assume that if we are contracting with St. Vincent de Paul has its own insurance and everything else for that. But I just want to kind of clarify that, because I know that, I know while Councilor Semple is actively promoting self-management, self-management doesn't deal with the issue of liability and who ultimately is responsible for injury or, other things that could occur in these situations.
So when you say this, who is liable for this, or do you mean the current camp on 525? Or, you kind of named all of them.
We're in this together. Who is the primary holder of the cards? Is it the county? Is it the county and us? What's the, liability trail if somebody wants to sue us?
Well, I can say that regardless of what I say, it doesn't prevent anybody from suing us. But I think we have the property at 525 is county property. The property at 717 is St. Vincent de Paul property. And so are we property owners for the basis of like we're park property owners, and so we have some inherent liability simply as being the property owners? That isn't the case in this situation. None of the properties we're talking about right now are owned by the city. So it really, again, it doesn't prevent someone from naming us in a lawsuit, but when it comes to our risk right now, what we're talking about is providing for people because you're trying to find solutions, not because you're doing it out of fear of liability. That's not where, when we're talking about this properties, that's not where we are on that. Did that help?
A little bit.
Okay. Pardon?
Okay.
We're not, none of that property is ours under, it's not leased by us, none of it is. It is, like I said, it is the county property is 525, and then St. Vincent de Paul owns, I just wanted to turn and look since I'm stating things in absolutes. 717 is owned by St. Vincent de Paul. So we don't have any ownership of any of that property. We have, our officers are going out there, so inherently, that always has potential there, but we do that every day throughout the entire city. So it's not a different type of liability. It is just what we do as our officers do their jobs. So it's no different there.
Okay. All right. I think, Mike, I'm going to ask you to put the first motion on the table. And, Mike, I will also ask you to announce the count to me since there's a lag in the webcast and I won't see it.
Mayor, as I understand it, the meeting has just run out of time and we need at least half an hour for the voting.
Oh, all right. Let's extend for 10 minutes. If we can have a motion to extend for 10 minutes.
Motion to extend for 10 minutes.
Second.
All in favor? How are we doing?
That's 7-1.
All right, excellent. Okay, so now let's put the first motion on the table.
Question on process, Mayor. Will there be discussion on each of these motions, or will that not be allowed?
I will allow it in a limited way. I think we've had 2 hours or more. We had a full hour and a half to discuss this. So, if there's still needs clarification, but I'm feeling that everyone got a chance to basically say what they had to say. So it would have to be an urgent need. We could do a lightning round if necessary.
Decision-making process, or will all of us have?
It is a subject. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So put the first motion on the table.
Move to expand by 80 spaces the current dusk to dawn program located at 717 Highway 99.
Second.
Second. Okay. Is there a need for discussion or questions? All right. All in favor? How many? Mike, can you give me a count, please?
There are 7 in favor and 1 opposed.
All right. So that passes. Thank you very much. Let's put the second motion on the table.
Move to pilot the provision of daytime services for the additional 80 spaces so that the addition of the 80 spaces effectively function as a dawn-to-dawn pilot program.
Second.
Is there any need for clarification
Yes.
from this? All right, Mike?
Will at any time any campers ever be required to leave the premises for purposes of what was previously discussed as a dusk to dawn format? In other words, for all intents and purposes, can folks stay there and keep their things there permanently now?
I am going to let Terry McDonald respond to that.
I'm asking the function in which it will
It's
operate.
it's not a prison camp. You can come and go as you choose. However, you have a slot there. It's a 24/7 slot for you available, and you can come and go.
So that was really my question is, it would be fair for a reasonable person to define this as a permanent campsite for someone.
Yes.
Thank you, sir, very much.
Okay, ready for a vote. All in favor?
That would be 7 in favor and 1 against, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, third motion.
Move to authorize St. Vincent de Paul to pilot a micro dawn-to-dawn type program at 450 Highway 99 or 717 Highway 99.
Second.
Any clarification needed for this?
Alan.
Just clarification.
Alan?
One clarification. So on the last motion, I think there's a difference of opinion of what permanent means. I think what Terry McDonald was talking about was all of these facilities are transitional to get people to move out of the system, not get stuck, but move on to the degree that they need to be there. So maybe, Terry, you could call.
Anytime you're living in a temporary facility, it is not an intent to make that a permanent residence. It is always our intention to try and get people to move on and to work in their best interest to see that they can find permanent, decent housing for permanently. Right. So none of this is ever anything that we would consider a permanent dwelling.
May I ask?
Permanent is housing.
Permanent is housing.
Right. Thank you.
May I ask a question, Mayor?
Yes.
Terry, when is someone required to move along? At what amount of days?
For the Dusk to Dawn, it's been a 6-month program. Pardon me.
For this new permanent 24/7, at what number of days will they be required to move on?
I can't answer that question because I don't know how long the program is.
Were the program to be indefinitely funded by its design, how long would people have to be there 24/7? At what number of days would they be required to go?
Well, no one is required to be there 24/7, period. Having said that, how long can they stay in that particular setting? We're having to make that up as we're going along.
Okay.
The intent is, however, to not make this anything close to what you would consider permanent housing, because this is not permanent housing. The intent is to try and get to deal with an emergency situation that we have right now with unhoused people not having a decent place to stay. And I'm not saying this is the most decent place. This is just one that's safer.
Thank you.
Okay. Third motion is on the table and seconded. All in favor?
Looks like 7-1, Mayor.
All right, that's great. And now we go on to the fourth one.
Move to authorize the expenditure of up to $150,000 for the pilot programs.
Second.
Any clarification needed on this? Okay, all in favor?
Looks like a familiar number, 7-1.
7-1. All right. Thank you very, very much. They all passed. I want to thank all of you. Mike, thank you for helping me get through that. I really also want to commend staff for the incredible amount of work you did, and St. Vincent de Paul, really heroic effort to be agile and inventive and highly energetic. So thank you all very much. Thank you for coming, and we are adjourned.